On the 2nd of July 2012, many Nigerian coastal and inland cities experienced heavy rains, and residents of Lagos were gasping for breath due to flooding. There were gridlocks on many roads, and thousands of stranded commuters had to pay increased fares for few bus drivers who were willing to risk traveling on the roads.
If we look at the issue of flooding now, the reason we're having frequent flooding, the reason we're having very devastating floods is because of climate change.
In late July 2012, at least 39 people were killed due to flooding in the central Nigerian Plateau State. Heavy rainfall caused the Lamingo Dam to overflow near Jos, sweeping across a number of neighborhoods, and approximately 200 homes were submerged and destroyed. The floods left 3,000 people homeless, many of whom took refuge in public buildings. In mid-August, flooding killed at least 33 people again in Plateau State as roads and bridges were washed away, obstructing relief efforts. Over 12,000 people were affected by the flooding in 6 districts of the state, while hundreds were rendered homeless. Release of water from the Labo Reservoir in Cameroon caused the deaths of 30 people in Benue State.
Then you have issue of dam management in Nigeria. We have so many dams, dozens of dams scattered all over the place. But those dams are meant to be desilted virtually every year. In some cases, you find that we go for years without desilting the dams, removing the debris, the sand that accumulates. So the dam loses its ability to return the quantum of water for which it was designed. If you had 5 million liters of water supposed to be contained, it may shrink to 2 million. So now that dam becomes a threat to the inhabitants downstream because it can now overflow easily. We've seen that happening around the Benue, Macaulay axis, Niger River Benue axis.
In early October, the floods spread to Delta and Bayelsa states and rendered about 120,000 people homeless, according to the state authorities and the Nigeria Red Cross. In Delta State, among the buildings destroyed by the floods were 20 health clinics, 5 hospitals, many schools, churches, and government buildings. These floods also spread across Benue State, where a local river overflowed, causing the displacement of over 25,000 people. On the 9th of October 2012, the then Nigerian president, Goodluck Jonathan, released 17.6 billion naira to various states and agencies for damage response, flood relief, and rehabilitation. Kogi State was the worst affected, with 623,000 people being displaced. President Jonathan called the floods a national disaster. 10 years later, what lessons have really been learned from these terrible tragedies? Have there been critical academic studies to understand why 2012 was a dreadful disaster for Nigeria where flooding is concerned? The Tertiary Education Trust Fund is providing the inspiration to develop appropriate frameworks to mitigate the effects of climate change and to ensure a sustainable environment through interventions in the academia. These are the chronicles of the journey to institutionalize research and development in Nigeria. Hello, and welcome to this edition of TETFund, The Paradigm Shift. I am Stanley Bentu. One of the most prevalent natural disasters in Nigeria is perennial flooding. Now, some states are increasingly experiencing annual flooding during rainy season. Increasingly, a link is being made between flood incidences and climate change. Beyond flooding, Nigerians have in recent times continued to witness unconscionable destruction of lives and property through frequent herdsmen and farmer clashes. What initially began as intermittent but innocuous quarrels between farmers and herdsmen over land and grazing routes, over time has escalated into bloody clashes. The clashes first began in the middle belt states of Plateau and Benue, before spreading to neighboring states of Adamawa, Nasarawa, and Taraba, and later to the southern part of the country. Climate change affects everything from geopolitics to economics to migration. It shapes cities, life experiences, and even wine lists. And because it touches everything, that we have to examine it from every single imaginable angle. All these plans are perfected through the proper deployment of applied research. Now, TETFund believes that the solution to such problems should not just be actions based on hunches, but on deliberate applications of carefully crafted plans which yield from Nigeria's public tertiary education institutions. The fund has backed up its conviction through its various centers of excellence that deal with environmental issues and biodiversity protection. This edition of the program X-rays the Nigerian environment as it tackles the global issues of climate change. So let's find out how the country's wildlife are running out of places to live and how this dire situation is feeding Nigeria's security problems.
Africa, Nigeria inclusive, is home to rich and varied biological resources, forming its natural wealth in which its socio-economic system is based. Nigeria is home to a remarkable animal, plant, and marine biodiversity. The country is rich in tropical forests, wetlands, deserts, savanna and grasslands, providing critical ecosystem services and serving as buffers to climate change. For example, mangrove forests protect coastal societies from cyclones and tsunamis, while serving as homes for various species and a source of income for the local people. It is the fear of species extinction emanating from poor attitude of the citizenry towards the protection of biodiversity in Nigeria that has necessitated a response from TETFund to develop an R&D strategy that aims to mitigate the effects of climate change, ensure environmental sustainability, and protect the national ecosystem. Biodiversity in Nigeria is seriously under the threat of extinction, not just from climate change, but also from economic development, land use changes, invasive species, and pollution. Crude oil exploration and exploitation that has threatened mainly the mangroves, deforestation, desert encroachment, bushmeat hunting, road and residential building, construction, etc.
It is a serious problem, and the reason is because we are not practicing sustainable use of our forest resources. I always tell people, there is nothing wrong with cutting wood. There's nothing wrong with using it for firewood, for whatever you want to use it for. But the problem is that we are not replanting. It is not called deforestation if you're planting more. It's just called utilization. So the reason we have deforestation is because we're not doing things sustainably. We cut down trees, we don't replant. We come into an estate with 500 houses, not a single tree incorporated in the landscaping. You know, that's a crazy thing because people want to cram as many houses as possible so they can make more money. In other climes, for every number of houses you build, you're supposed to have a certain acreage of grass and trees and diversity habitat, which attracts them naturally. So when it comes to diversity, we're losing a lot of forest diversity because of unplanned urbanization and unsustainable use of our resources. We are chasing away the animals, we're chasing away the birds. The more noise we create within an environment, the less likely you will find the natural inhabitants there. They tend to migrate.
How do we address the ongoing disastrous loss of biodiversity while building better societies? The African Union recently launched a new Continental Green Recovery Action Plan for the period of 2021 to 2027 that includes a pillar for biodiversity. Focus will be on biodiversity through work on sustainable land management, including forestry and marine ecosystems. We can and must ensure we put climate action and protection of biodiversity at the heart of national budgets and planning processes. This, in turn, will facilitate resource mobilization for implementing the 2030 Agenda, Agenda 2063, as well as Paris Agreement and the protection of biodiversity. At the University of Lagos, which hosts a TETFund Center of Excellence, research is being carried out in biodiversity, which is defined as the variability among living organisms from all sources, including inter alia, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species and of ecosystems.
The Center for Biodiversity Conservation and Ecosystem Management has been active in the space of conservation, not only in southern Nigeria, but even across Nigeria. We have a team of scientists, multidisciplinary group, botanists, geographers, sociologists, education, geneticists, zoologists, marine scientists, microbiologists, data scientists that have been modeling, that have been collecting endangered, threatened species, that have been collecting even underutilized species and finding what the significance would be for the growth of the country towards the economy. We've collected species that we want to reintroduce that we knew our parents used to eat in the olden days across the Nigerian space, and trying to grow them, breed them for better yield, and also reintroduce them to ecosystems where they can thrive and do well. So over the years, we've been in that space, and we are very happy today that we are being acknowledged by TETFund in that space as a center of excellence.
As the banks of the Chad Basin continue to recede and degrade, so too does Nigeria's fragile internal security situation. While Nigeria has certainly not been left untouched by the terrorist cells sweeping Africa's Sahel region with increasing momentum, the country's ongoing farmer-herder conflict remains Nigeria's most acute security issue. A conflict now ranked 6 times more deadly than the Boko Haram insurgency, with no signs of abating. While political, ethnic, and cultural factors have affected this dispute singularly, this conflict's rootedness in climate change appears unique. Leading social scientists have described this climate change as a threat multiplier due to the way in which it has worsened pre-existing problems within the region, a theory currently playing out across Nigeria with deadly force. This dispute, predominantly between nomadic herders and static farmers, was initially a result of desertification and drought in the northern Sahel region of the country that instigated mass migration of those herders south in search for fertile pastures and a constant water supply. Disagreements and conflicts over the grassland, property and space has been exacerbated by the increased presence of militia within Nigeria and new government laws banning herders' practices in Benue and Taraba State in the northeastern part of Nigeria.
As the climate change pressures intensify in the Sahel region, as I said, in that region you have mostly pastoral inhabitants who depend on the soil for grazing grass, for their own nutritional needs, they grow things to feed on, and then water. And climate change is affecting all these things. The ground is drying up, the rivers are shrinking at a rapid, the lakes are shrinking. We look at Lake Chad that used to be about 25,000 square kilometers 30 years ago. Now it's only about 2,000 square kilometers, about 90% shrinkage. And that goes for a lot of all the lakes and rivers in that region. So it is pushing people down out of necessity because there's just not enough grazing ground, there's not enough agricultural ground. In that whole region, coming into Nigeria, you have at least 20 million heads of cattle that must feed every day. You have about 50 million heads of sheep. You have about 70 million goats. And they need about 1 billion liters of water every single day. And those resources are not there anymore. So people are forced to migrate southward in search of green pastures. But the problem we have now is that desertification is intensifying. Each year we are losing about 3.5 square kilometers in Nigeria in the frontline states in the north. So it's pushing down and aridifying the soil, making it prone to crop failures, to low yields, and to famine in some cases.
Managing these issues quickly and effectively will be imperative for any future government, hoping to ensure the safety of its population. According to the Organization for World Peace, new sustainable herding management practices must be implemented with the help of farmers and aid groups within the region to ensure a fine balance between the use of sustainably arable and grazing land. Furthermore, investments in green jobs within Nigeria could be critical in tackling both global warming and the rise in terrorism. The answer can only be found in research and development that emanates from Nigeria's universities, polytechnics, and colleges of education.
Scientific research is at the core of wildlife conservation. It allows us to understand how to conserve wildlife and wild places and to measure the impact of our work to save them. Now, all over the world, scientists produce hundreds of research papers each year. Now, over the years, in various parts of the world, science has helped prevent the extinction of the American bison. It helped to inform the creation of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And it also helped to inform a ban on commercial whaling, among many other conservation successes during the last century. More recently, science has given important data that would help the recovery of forest elephants that have been decimated by poaching. The same goes for security problems. The truth is that too often, many people living in conflict don't get asked for their perspectives and ideas. And too often, no one is prepared to really listen. But in the same way that companies or businesses depend on feedback from their clients, listening to people about their experiences of insecurity and what could be done to make them feel safer is crucial for tailoring support to people in conflict-affected contexts, to their own identified needs, and not the ones that we assume for them. For peace-building organizations, this means planning and conducting research that is of practical value, in that we can learn from it and improve support to those living through conflict. The best research is valuable to participants as well as researchers. Many of these already applied scientific findings are quite useful. But for any application to work perfectly in Nigeria, it would have to be homegrown and home-specific. So the Nigerian academia being active in this field is most desirable. And that is what TETFund is financially backing through its Centers of Excellence, Research and Development Standing Committee, and the NRF. But how can we go about building research in a way that is sensitive to the experiences of people who are living through conflict and make it useful to those who participated in the research. Let's have a look.
Healthy ecosystems clean our water, purify our air, maintain our soil, regulate the climate, recycle nutrients, and provide us with food. They provide raw materials and resources for medicines and other purposes. They are the foundation of all civilization and sustain our economies. It is that simple. We could not live without these ecosystem services. They are what we call our natural capital. Humans have a moral obligation to preserve nature and its features, and there are many important reasons for this. Forests are a significant part of the environment, which helps in providing various raw materials such as food, rubber, timber, and essential oils. Forest management means availability and sustainable use of these natural resources. Just as the way you treat other people reflects your personality, the way you treat the environment reflects who you actually are. A good person will treat the environment responsibly. But how can human behavior be influenced in such a way as to better preserve the environment?
Explorations and expeditions. Some of our developed partners are very well versed in that area. They undertake expeditions to the Arctic Circle, to the Antarctic, trying to understand the historical trend of climate change. So I think we need to look at all aspects of research, not just what is happening in books or in the lab or even within their immediate ecosystem. They need to venture out and do comparative research. It helps. Then the other thing that they need to also look at is we are now developing technologies to mitigate the effects of climate change and sometimes to even undo what has been done, what we call the negative emissions technology spectrum, wherein there are things you develop that can sequester carbon just like trees do naturally. You can have technologies. If you have an industrial zone, those things can harvest the carbon back that have already been put into the atmosphere, or they can prevent them from escaping into the atmosphere. So that's the area where the world is looking at now, because we are finding that just the natural adaptation and mitigation protocols might not be enough to avoid the climate catastrophe that is looming now.
Tourism is an industry that is heavily dependent on a well-preserved environment. Many societies have benefited from funding, support, and economic revitalization through tourism. Tourists are mainly attracted to areas such as forests and zoos, which are all part of our environment. In addition to this, there is the even more important aspect of environmental protection, which is related to our well-being. Medicines can be found throughout the forests. Medicines are found in the forest that can be used for a wide variety of health disorders. Medicines can be extracted to cure infections and a myriad of health problems. This is yet another example of how nature meets science and technology. So what advice does Dr. Osonwa have for TETFund as it continues its journey to bring the academia to the heart of problem solving in Nigeria?
So research is key. Research is designed to interrogate issues, get to the root of critical questions, and provide answers, fact-based answers, scientific answers. So the academic world is key in this regard, because that is their bread and butter. That is what they thrive on, is to look for information, is to search, to investigate, to research.
Whether the challenge that we are being faced with has to do with flooding, deforestation, desertification, or a loss of biodiversity, or even climate change, the challenge ahead is certainly great. Now, we can decide to remain unwitting participants in our societal demise, or we could nurse and nurture our environment back to life. The effects of climate change are already becoming apparent, and if we fail to address these interlinked crises, we will see more hunger, new pandemics, greater injustice, marginalization, more conflicts, and forced migration. Conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity is a cornerstone for development. Loss of diversity poses a risk to existing development gains and to further progress. And that is the paradigm shift. Now, join us again on the next edition of the program. But until then, thank you for stopping by. Good night.